People who have lived in the same place for a long time without moving generally know their neighbors well. They understand whom to trust and to what extent, and whom it's better to stay away from. Sometimes, neighbors, living side by side for years, become closer than some family members. They are asked to look after the house and property while the family is away on vacation or traveling. They invite each other over, and without a second thought, allow their children to accept treats from these individuals. However, sometimes the person who has lived next door for many years can turn out to be a real maniac who has just been waiting for the right moment. The case of Daiana Garnica became one of the most sensational in Argentina in recent years. A lot of effort and time went into the investigation, and the criminal could have escaped punishment, as there was almost no direct evidence against him. He did not admit his guilt, and the victim's body was never found. Who was Daiana Garnica? Family, early years. Daiana Abigail Garnica Cisneros was born on March 30th, 2000, in the province of Tucumán, in the town of Villa Mariano Moreno El Colmenar, Argentina. She grew up in a poor, large family where she was the youngest daughter and the seventh, second-to-last child of her parents. Her parents, Ramon Garnica and Elizabeth Susana Cisneros, worked hard to provide for their many children and create at least somewhat comfortable living conditions for them. As the youngest girl in the family, Daiana was everyone's favorite. Her parents adored her, and her older brothers and sisters took care of her. She did well in school, was talented in drawing, and from a young age, loved to dance. She was unusually intelligent and sensible for her age, never lied to her family, had no secrets from her mother and father, and was very close to her older sister Sonia, who essentially took care of her upbringing while their parents were at work. Since the Garnica family was quite religious, the parents, along with their children, regularly attended church and tried to live honestly and correctly. The older children also began working from their teenage years to help their parents somewhat. The younger ones kept the house in order and each had their responsibilities, which they were accountable for. Daiana dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future because she always aimed to help those around her, was very kind, sensitive, and responsive. She hoped to build a successful career, help her family, and said that she would buy her parents a big house where her mom could plant a garden with flowers and fruit trees that she always dreamed of. Unfortunately, these dreams were never to be realized. Moving to a new city, parents' divorce. In 2013, after Ramon lost his job due to worsening financial troubles, the family was forced to move to Juan Bautista Alberdi, located in the same province of Tucumán. The move was extremely difficult for them, and initially their problems only increased. The relationship between the spouses, who had been together for over 2 decades, quickly deteriorated. They began to argue constantly and eventually decided that they could no longer stay together. The divorce was a severe shock for all the children, but the younger ones felt it most acutely. Daiana, upon learning what had happened, was simply devastated. The world of a 13-year-old girl crumbled in an instant, and she simply could not understand what would happen next. Despite the separation, the father continued to support his ex-wife and children, but he soon started another family. Elizabeth also struggled greatly with the divorce, but her children supported her, and she was fortunate to find a decent job with a reasonable salary for that area. Gradually, the family adapted to their new reality, settled into their new home, made friends, and established good relationships with nearby residents. Across from the Garnica family lived a certain Dario Javier Suarez. He was a very pleasant, friendly, and kind 36-year-old man. He lived with his wife, Yasmina Alejandra Villarreal, with whom he was raising 4 children. He also had 2 children from previous relationships, and 1 child out of wedlock. It's noteworthy that Dario and his family moved to Juan Bautista Alberdi just 6 months before the Garnicas settled there. Perhaps that's why they quickly became close friends, as they were newcomers to the area. Previously, Suarez had lived in the province of Santiago del Estero, in the northern part of Argentina. Dario, along with his wife, 2 brothers, and some other relatives, worked at a local brick factory located just a mile from their home. His children were about the same age as Daiana and her siblings. They attended the same school, quickly found common ground, and became friends. The adults also got along well, allowing their children to visit each other, even staying overnight, celebrated family events together, and became almost like family. Sonia and Daiana even babysat the youngest neighbor's children while their parents were at work. First, Job and teenage romance. After the divorce, Ramon did what he could to help his ex-wife and older children, but after he started a new family, he nearly stopped sending money. The mother's job, although it provided a stable income, was disastrously insufficient for a large family. The family even started a small business making and selling homemade baked goods, but it quickly failed. The situation became so dire that in her upper school years, Daiana had to drop out of school to start working and help her mother. The 16-year-old girl took a job as a caregiver, looking after an elderly ill person. Since she wanted to become a doctor in the future, Garnica thought this experience would be beneficial. Despite her young age, she approached her job with full seriousness and responsibility. She precisely followed all instructions, monitored the medication schedule, performed necessary hygiene procedures, and cooked diet-specific meals, adhering to recommendations developed by the treating doctor. Daiana liked her job. She felt needed and useful, strived to do everything right, and was highly valued for it. She worked nearly every day from morning to evening, but still faithfully attended church on Sundays with her mother and sisters. She also entered into a romantic relationship with a boy they had previously gone to school with. Sometimes, in the evenings, the young couple walked in the park, simply talking and enjoying each other's company. Nevertheless, Daiana adhered to the strict rules and schedule set by her mother. She always returned home by 10 o'clock in the evening, did not stay out at night, and never went anywhere without informing her family where and with whom she would be and when she would return. Sometimes, she went to the city market with the neighbors and their children to buy necessities, but her mother always knew about such trips. Dario treated the neighbor's girl like his own daughter, took care of her, and even occasionally spoiled her with small gifts. When the man learned that she had a boyfriend, he paternalistically gave her advice about how boys could be deceitful and warned her not to let him deceive her or take advantage of her naivety and innocence. The girl shared this conversation with her mother, from whom she still had no secrets. Elizabeth found the neighbor's behavior somewhat strange, but she decided that it was his way of showing care, as he also had teenage daughters the same age as Daiana, a strange request. On May 6, 2017, in the late afternoon, Daiana unexpectedly received a call from her neighbor, who expressed a desire to help her family out of the goodness of his heart. At that time, Garnica was indeed in desperate need of money, but she was expecting a bonus soon, which she planned to spend on getting a dental prosthesis for her mom and starting repairs on their home's roof, which had started leaking after a recent rainstorm. However, Dario suddenly mentioned that he wanted to buy an air conditioner for Elizabeth as a gift and asked Daiana to accompany him to help choose the right one. He insisted that Daiana should not tell her mother about it because he wanted it to be a surprise, which wouldn't be possible if she knew. He set up a meeting place and once again extracted a promise from her that she would tell no one. At the moment she received this odd call, Daiana was just returning home from work. The neighbor urged her to go with him right away, but she said she needed to drop off groceries she'd bought on the way home and change her clothes. Upon arriving home, she naturally told her mother everything, as she never lied or kept secrets from her. The woman found it odd, too. Although they were on good terms with the neighbors, they had never done anything like this before. Elizabeth wanted to call Dario herself to thank him and decline the gift, as an air conditioner was not a necessity for their family. However, her daughter convinced her not to do so, saying she would go to the store as promised, but would decline the expensive purchase. The girl reassured her mother that everything would be fine and that she would return home not too late. At that moment, the neighbor sent a text message to Daiana's phone, stating he was already waiting for her, and again requested that she tell no one about their meeting to keep the surprise. Daiana replied that she was on her way out, but then noticed that her phone was almost dead. She decided to leave it at home to charge. She met Dario at the agreed place, and that was the last time anyone saw her. A mysterious disappearance. When her daughter hadn't returned home by the evening, Elizabeth grew worried, especially since she couldn't call her because the phone was left at home. The woman waited a little longer, but as it grew dark, she started to panic. She first called her eldest daughter, Sonia, and told her everything, but she tried to reassure her mother, assuring her that her sister would return home soon and that nothing bad could have happened. As it got completely dark, the mother heard the sound of the neighbor's motorcycle, which pulled up to the house across the street. She thought Dario and her daughter had returned, so she breathed a sigh of relief. However, 5, 10, 20 minutes passed, and the girl still hadn't entered the house. Then the woman went outside and saw that the neighbor was alone. She approached him and asked about Daiana, but he seemed surprised and said he didn't know anything about her and hadn't seen her that day. Elizabeth was stunned. She didn't know what to think and couldn't understand whether the neighbor was lying or if her daughter had deceived her for the first time in her life and gone somewhere else. However, the man insisted on his story and even handed her his phone to confirm he hadn't contacted her daughter. Naturally, by that time, he had already deleted all calls and messages. Dario also expressed concern about the girl's whereabouts and even offered to drive around the neighborhood with her mother to look for her and ask neighbors and the teenager's friends if they had seen anything suspicious. However, the woman declined his help, deciding to start the search herself with her older children. They walked around the neighborhood until late at night, questioning everyone they met along the way and calling all of the girl's friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen her that day. Returning home, Elizabeth decided to check her daughter's phone and saw 2 missed calls and a message from the neighbor, as her daughter had not deleted them. Fully convinced that Dario was lying, the woman decided to go to the police and also called her ex-husband to inform him that their youngest daughter had vanished without a trace. The man lived several hundred miles from his ex-wife's home, but upon hearing the alarming news, he immediately drove to her to help search for their daughter. Police indifference and the horrific scene at the brick factory. When a worried woman arrived at the police station in the middle of the night with a report of her daughter's disappearance, the officers did not take the matter seriously. They assumed that the girl had probably run off with her boyfriend or gone to a party with friends and would return home by morning. Elizabeth shared her suspicions about the neighbor and even showed the calls and messages on her daughter's phone. But the officers dismissed her concerns, saying they would not start a search until at least 24 hours had passed. Realizing they could only rely on themselves, the Garnica family organized a massive search effort. By that time, the father had already arrived from another city, and together they went to the neighbor's house to have a serious talk. However, the house was empty, dark, and quiet, and no one responded to their knocks. The family then went to the brick factory where the neighbor worked with his relatives, and there, the relatives of the missing girl made a dreadful discovery. Since Dario was the senior member of his crew, he had keys to the factory and could access it even when it was closed. That night, the lights were on, and when the girl's relatives entered, they encountered a horrifying scene. The brick-making furnaces were on, though it was a day off and the factory was supposed to be closed. Moreover, all the adult members of the neighbor's family were present. They appeared agitated and were clearly in the process of burning something in the furnaces. The Garnicas were struck by a terrible suspicion. Dario was not in the factory, and when they asked his relatives where he was and what was happening, those present tried to deflect, saying they were preparing equipment for operation and conducting maintenance, and mentioned that the man had just been there and might have stepped out to the restroom. However, within the few minutes that this conversation lasted, the suspect managed to leave the factory through the back door, secretly escaping. Search for evidence and arrest of suspects. After the frightening scene at the factory and the strange behavior of Dario's relatives, the missing girl's family decided to contact the prosecutor's office. By that time, almost 24 hours had passed since the teenager's disappearance, and the investigation was supposed to begin. However, it turned out that no information from the police station where the parents had reported the girl's disappearance had reached them. This situation outraged and angered prosecutor Claudio Banari, who took the case under his personal control and promised to punish the police officers who had neglected their duties. His first action was to request a warrant to search Dario's home and the brick factory. However, since it was Sunday and the judicial system was unavailable, the prosecutor, not wanting to waste precious time, decided to organize everything under his own responsibility. Banari suspected that the suspect might have attacked the teenager, assaulted her, and then ended her life, asking his relatives for help to dispose of the body and evidence. He found it suspicious that Dario's entire family was in the factory on their day off in the middle of the night and had inexplicably started the furnaces. The calls and messages from the man to his young neighbor's phone also appeared suspicious. As the family searched for the girl, including through social media, the case quickly received wide publicity, leading to various speculations and guesses. For instance, a theory widely circulated that the young beauty could have been kidnapped to be sold into slavery in a brothel or for organs. One woman even accused a specific person, although it later turned out she was just trying to settle scores with an ex-boyfriend and send him to prison. The search of the suspect's house yielded no results. Obviously, he had not brought the girl there, and the crime had occurred elsewhere. No traces were found at the brick factory either, but Banari did not rule out that the furnaces could have been used as a crematorium to destroy the body and evidence. However, these were only guesses and hypotheses. Nevertheless, the prosecutor initiated the arrest of Dario, using the data from the missing girl's phone as a key argument. His brothers Cesar and Marcus, his wife, sister, mother-in-law, and some other relatives were also arrested as possible accomplices. During interrogation, the suspect denied all charges against him, claiming he had not seen the neighbor and had not communicated with her that day. However, based on data analysis from his phone, as well as gadgets belonging to his relatives and the victim, clear discrepancies in their statements were identified. The man was charged with unlawful detainment, possible assault, and depriving the girl of her life, while his relatives were accused of criminal conspiracy and complicity. All suspects were sent to jail for 3 months during the investigation. The search for Daiana. Despite the police's initial disbelief that the missing girl would be found alive, her parents continued to hope for the best. They involved an increasing number of people in the search, organized marches and rallies, engaged the media in the investigation, and demanded that Dario confess where their daughter was and what he had done to her. In desperation, the parents sought audiences with the then ministers of security and justice to influence the investigation and pressure the suspect into making a statement. Although the missing girl's relatives were received by the highest state structures, unfortunately, this did not reflect in practice. Over 200 police officers were involved in the search, as well as service dogs and special equipment including helicopters and search drones, but there were still no results. Alarming discoveries. At a brick factory in one of the kilns during a second inspection, a strange, severely melted metal object was found, along with a tooth fragment. It was suspected that this object was the piercing the missing girl wore in her nose. However, special forensic analysis was required to confirm this, and it would take time. While law enforcement awaited the results, another more thorough search was conducted at Dario's house, where notebooks belonging to the man were found containing quite suspicious notes. These appeared to be sort of personal diaries, from which it was revealed that the man was literally obsessed with his young neighbor. Everything started when the family moved in next door to his house. At that time, she was only 13 years old. The suspect did not write anything specific about what he wanted to do with the girl, but the notes made it clear that she drove him mad. He thought about her every day for years and periodically wrote letters addressed to the neighbor, in which he confessed his love in a peculiar form. After studying all the notes, investigators concluded that the man's obsession only grew over time, and he could no longer control his vile desires. In one of the last letters, he addressed the girl with words implying that she would eventually belong to him, and he would grant her eternal peace and tranquility. This entry looked like a direct threat, indicating that Dario might indeed have taken advantage of her and then dealt with her. The disappearance of physical evidence. It seemed that based solely on the entries from the diaries, the case could be brought to court, but the results of the forensic analysis were still pending. When Benari tried to find out the reason for the delay, it turned out that the evidence had simply disappeared. It was impossible to conduct a DNA analysis of the tooth fragment to determine if it belonged to the missing girl or to establish what the strange metal object was. Subsequently, the prosecutor decided to classify information about the investigation's progress, and the police officers responsible for preserving the evidence were immediately fired and also detained for criminal negligence and possible assistance to the suspects. The investigation itself, after this egregious incident, came under the direct control of federal authorities. Moreover, it soon emerged that part of the records found in the suspect's home had also disappeared. Among these was the last letter in which he promised to grant the girl eternal rest. Without these pieces of evidence, the case could simply fall apart, and the criminal and his accomplices might escape punishment. However, no measures helped determine where the physical evidence had vanished to. 3 months later, the detention period for the suspects expired, but bringing the case to court without key evidence was risky and evidently threatened a loss. What remained were data from the girl's phone and testimony from a random witness who saw the suspect and the missing girl walking together on the street on the day she disappeared. Dario's lawyer demanded that the entire investigation be declared invalid and his client be immediately released, as well as the search results annulled since they were conducted without a special warrant. The court only partially granted the defense's request. The main suspect remained in custody, but all his relatives were released, as nothing specific could be charged against them. However, in May 2019, 2 years after the girl's disappearance, Dario was also released. Over that time, the investigation had not progressed, no new evidence had emerged, and the body had not been found. The long-awaited trial and verdict. Although the main suspect was set free, the case was not closed, and the investigation continued. Occasionally, evidence and testimonies emerged suggesting Daiana might still be alive. For instance, a banknote was found with a plea for help allegedly written by the girl. However, handwriting analysis established that the writing did not belong to the missing girl. Only in June 2021, more than 4 years after the girl's disappearance, Prosecutor Benari finally managed to bring this challenging case to court. But the process was constantly delayed due to the global pandemic raging worldwide, and the Garnica family felt increasingly disheartened. The relatives no longer hoped for a favorable outcome, or that the guilty would face deserved punishment. The trial only began in April 2023, 6 years after the crime was committed, with the culprit finally appearing in court. By that time, the missing entries from Dario's diaries, which everyone believed were lost forever, had been found. These became the key pieces of evidence proving the man's guilt. However, additional expert analysis was required to verify the authenticity of these documents. In addition to this, 2 new witnesses appeared in the case. One was Dario's former lover, who claimed he had seduced her when she was still a teenager. She also asserted that the suspect always had a weakness for young girls, and she was far from the only one he had treated this way. The second witness was a neighbor of Caesar, Dario's brother and probable accomplice. According to him, on the night of the girl's disappearance, the brothers arrived together on a motorcycle with a strange large bundle in the sidecar, took some tools from a shed, and then left together. The witness had remained silent for so long because he feared Caesar could harm his family, as he was always volatile and aggressive. The defendant never admitted his guilt, claiming he would never harm the neighboring girl, to whom he felt as though she were his daughter. Nonetheless, the few pieces of evidence were sufficient to render a guilty verdict. The body of the missing girl was never found, and the events of that fateful day were painstakingly reconstructed, establishing that the man lured took advantage of the teenager and then ended her life and disposed of the remains, likely with the help of his relatives. On May 2nd, 2023, Dario was found guilty of the abduction, taking advantage of and ending the life of Daiana. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, the man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. so they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life, so at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect. The anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people, ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the Courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Andrals, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target. But his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salis, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salis immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a .380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal, and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car, though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salis? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salis, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salis and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salis was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrals, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andrals. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all 3 men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of 2 men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women, who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Shipalina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, This turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Cipollina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling, since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, he was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salis, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salis, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, the lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Andrals Law. After the attack, Mike Andrals spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salis, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members. Before starting the story, I want to apologize for my bad English. I am not a native speaker. However, I am trying my best for you guys. Thanks for your understanding. It's pretty exciting to admit to your parents the decision to play your own wedding. Tina Thomas was a lot more nervous than her fiancé, Gabe Watson. Tina was 26 years old at the time, just like her future husband, and this was her third serious relationship and second attempt at a wedding. Her first attempt to build a family with boyfriend Scott McCulloch ended in failure. No, the relationship between young people were just fine, but only Tina's mother was against this wedding, and Scott himself she did not like. There were no specific claims, but like every mother, she wanted a better and happier life for her daughter, and Tina herself, at that moment, was still very young. For this reason, the couple soon parted. The mirage of a joint future melted away. The second attempt, with Stan Marks, also failed. Here, Tina's parents did not play any role. The couple could not overcome the first 3-year crisis, and they parted by mutual consent. Finally, on Christmas Eve, at a party of friends, Tina meets Gabe Watson. We can't say it was love at first sight, on the contrary. The relationship was built more as mutual support for each other after a recent breakup. Yes, perhaps this is not the most joyful reason to start building a new relationship, but 2 years later, Gabe proposed marriage to Tina. Tina, having learned from bitter experience, said she agreed, but couldn't do it without parental blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided, like a real prince, beautifully and romantically appealed to the parents of his chosen one and chose Valentine's Day. But Tina's father was away, so the dinner was moved to the next day. On February 15th, during the dinner, when Watson voiced his decision to live with Tina all his life hand in hand, the father of the bride asked a seemingly simple question to the groom. "Does he love Tina?" Gabe stammered like a schoolboy but never answered. His father considered this reaction to be a common embarrassment among strangers. Then he asked his daughter the same question. Surprisingly, Tina did not answer this question directly either, but began her speech by saying that she was afraid of being alone at the age of 26. The father thought for a while and blessed the young ones. Preparing for a wedding takes a lot of time and effort, and while Tina was thinking about her outfit, her guests, and the whole wedding, Gabe was only planning the honeymoon. He didn't care at all how his future wife wanted to spend her vacation. He had already decided everything for her. His plan was to go to the Great Barrier Reef, which is located in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, and go diving there. First of all, to look at the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank back in 1911. The problem was that Tina, unlike Gabe, wasn't into diving. Yes, he took her scuba diving in the pool sometimes, in calm water under the supervision of lifeguards, but no more than that. Gabe, himself, was an experienced scuba diver. He was completing a rescue diving course and had over 50 dives to his credit at the time, and of course it wasn't in a pool. "If you don't learn to dive by our honeymoon, I'm warning you right away. You're staying home, walking the dog, or pruning roses in the garden. You're not going anywhere with me," said Gabe. Tina had no choice. In fact, Gabe even took out a loan to buy her own equipment and pay for her fiancé's classes. The first instructor Tina had taken lessons with was disappointed in her skills and even warned Gabe that his fiancée had absolutely no skills for open ocean swimming. A furious Gabe wouldn't listen to the diving instructor, accusing him of being the one who couldn't explain and refused to continue the class. The second instructor rather quickly gave Tina a credit, although then, and noted that Tina does everything from under the stick, solely to please her future husband. On October 11th, the young couple finally got married, and after 2 days, Tina and Gabe flew to Australia, spending on a trip of $10,000, which gave them for the wedding. It should be noted that Gabe devoted part of the honeymoon to Tina. They walked around Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium and the zoo. Tina was excited, but the closer they got to going to the Great Barrier Reef, the sadder she became. On the morning of October 21st, they flew to Townsville, and in the evening boarded a boat to one of the most beautiful places on Earth and every diver's dream. After a while, employees of the diving company will tell that in fact, the couple did not look like experienced divers, and even Gabe, who had graduated from courses and had experience behind him,
could hardly understand the equipment, as if he saw it for the first time in his life, but nevertheless, it was he who helped Tina to pass the exam before diving, although such a test should be conducted separately, and when the instructor offered Tina his help underwater, she refused. It was also noted in the dive log that there was a strong current that day, and this moment in history should not be missed or glossed over. Gabe, as I said, helped his wife sort out the equipment they had bought back in the US and went to get the tanks they had to rent. Gabe took an 11-liter tank for himself and gave his wife an 8.5-liter tank, which for this place was an extremely small volume or even dangerous, given Tina's experience, or rather lack thereof. It was not possible to descend to the Townsville Titanic from the first time. Tina asked for additional cargo because she could not dive to depth, and Gabe at first did not work underwater computer, which calculates the necessary speed of diving and ascent, as well as shows the amount of oxygen in the cylinders. After returning to the boat, the computer worked and they tried again. The wreck was 49 feet deep, and Tina was the first to submerge, Gabe swimming behind her. From Gabe's statement, "At first everything was fine. At some point Tina stopped, started waving at me, and later signaled that she wanted to go up. I realized right away that she was just panicking. She used to do that. By this time we were halfway up, so I decided to calm her down and stay with her at the same depth for a while, without further diving, so that she could psychologically get used to the pressure. She continued to breathe very deeply, which was unsafe, and that's when I noticed she was sinking. I tried to grab her belt to hold her down, but she swung her arms so hard that she knocked the mask off my face. While I was putting the mask back on my face, though it didn't take long, Tina was already too far away from me. For a while I tried to swim to her, but I was unsuccessful. Then I decided to return to the surface to ask for help from the lifeguards. On the way, I met another swimmer with a narrow-set eye, but he paid no attention to my signs for help. Yes, there were 2 Asian men with them at depth, but neither of them confirmed Gabe's words about his request for help. Later, when the police took underwater computer readings, they confirmed that Gabe did try to swim after his drowning wife for a while, but eventually gave up the attempt very quickly. Although the ascent to the surface itself was not an emergency, on the contrary, Gabe surfaced as instructed, stopping at each required depth level. As for the other divers, each of them, when questioned by police, claimed that Gabe could have saved his wife, but he simply did not. In addition, this tragic incident occurred at the very beginning of their dive, and therefore Gabe had enough oxygen in his tanks to swim to the bottom and return back to the surface. The rescuers on duty on the ship, as soon as they realized what had happened, immediately went in search of Tina and found her very quickly. But unfortunately, it was too late. Tina was lying on her back, with her eyes open under her mask, at a depth of 82 feet. Her body was immediately lifted up, and on the deck of the yacht, they gave her artificial respiration for about 40 minutes. But to no avail, Tina died. Gabe all this time did not come close to his wife, but only stood somewhere aside, and according to witnesses, naively sniffed his nose. The same employees of the company said that the young man on the way to the shore and smiled and even played cards with other passengers. Gabe denied this in court. The subsequent autopsy of Tina showed that not everything was so clear.
Yes, there are no signs of obvious violent death, but there are bruises on the neck. There are traces of blood in the nostrils, which is also common at the 82-foot depth where Tina's body was found. There are no traces of alcohol in the blood, but there are high levels of drugs such as ibuprofen and paracetamol, although these drugs are used in the treatment of seasickness. A small amount of fluid was seen in the lungs. The report stated that Tina died from drowning, but it is possible that she drowned while already deprived of oxygen. Tina's gear was checked by the Australian Water Police, but no malfunctions were noted. The police could have written it off as an accident. An inexperienced diver ignored safety rules and paid for it with his life. A very common case, unfortunately. But only there were suspicious moments in this story, such as rather ambiguous results of the autopsy. Also, according to the diving team, strange behavior of Watson, which does not fit into the conventional picture, where the husband grieves for his wife who just died. All these factors did not give so easily close the case. And that's why the investigation was taking quite a long time.
Gabe realized the detectives were digging for him. In addition, Tina's parents did not want to accept what had happened as a tragic accident and wanted to see their son-in-law in the dock. If not as the murderer of their daughter, then at least as a man who had not helped her. During the first interrogation, the police noted that the suspect was in shock, crying and laughing, twitching nervously, asking to call his father, who complained of pain in his ears, and begging him to tell his wife's parents about the tragedy. Late at night, Gabe was released. He went to the yacht that belonged to the company that sent them to the reef and asked them for a night's lodging, arguing that the trip was supposed to last 2 days, but because his wife had died, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half of the cost of their dive. In fact, he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flies to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. That same day, at Gabe's request, they go to the morgue. Gabe wanted to see his wife one more time. Because the husband was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee called the detective who was in charge of the case. In theory, Gabe could have hidden some evidence, but the grief-stricken husband only cried, held his wife's cold hand, and begged her forgiveness, not realizing at all that the police officer was standing outside the door at the time, recording him on a tape recorder. "I didn't mean to hurt you." These are the words Detective Lawrence later uses against Gabe in court. Then at the morgue, "You told Tina you didn't mean to hurt her. What did you mean by that?" Lawrence will ask his question. The story of Gabe's sore ear was repeated again as he was traveling home with his wife's body. During a layover in Oakland, he sought medical attention on the airport grounds and was held there for evaluation. According to the investigation, this was done on purpose to avoid seeing Tina's father. However, and divers will confirm this, ear problems are a fairly common ailment among divers. Tina's funeral was held on November 5th, where Gabe still had to meet with the deceased's father. Gabe, almost in full view of everyone, took off his wife's wedding ring, putting it on his ring finger over hers, as well as earrings, which he immediately handed over to his father-in-law. Watson and the Thomas family never crossed paths again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe would be asked the question, "Did you really take your wife's jewelry off during the funeral?" Gabe will only smile and shrug. "I don't think I could have done it later." Everyone had different opinions about Gabe. Some said that this chubby, funny man was quite a kind man, and some, on the contrary, called him a tyrant and a despot. But they all agreed on one thing. Gabe and Tina were not happy, or at least they didn't seem to be. Tina's friends confirmed what she'd told her father at a family dinner on February 15th. Her union with Gabe was just a way to avoid dying alone, and that fear had led Tina to die on the seabed. Also, the victim, who died shortly before their honeymoon, confessed to a friend that her husband dragged her by the hand to an insurance company where he forced her to insure his life at a higher interest rate in case of death, and put his name in the column beneficiary. This testimony was checked through the insurance agent, and he confirmed everything. The cab driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht was also questioned. Tina cried the whole way, but her husband paid no attention to her. Finally, Tina's friend Amanda Phillips told another story, and it became clear what the couple's relationship was really like. This damn jerk videotaped Tina urinating in the bathroom and then edited it and put it in a tape of them celebrating Christmas. That would have been okay, but he turned it on at a general viewing with a full house of guests. He laughed like a horse, while everyone twiddled their fingers around their temples and tried to explain to him that it was a very low act. I was clutching crosses on my fingers so Tina wouldn't get the idea to marry him. While removing jewelry right during a funeral may seem like a frightening and denunciatory act on Gabe's part, during the trial, in 2008, the jury was shown an extremely disturbing footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers from it and carrying them away. They were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father noticed the missing flowers, and to find out the thief, he set up a hidden camera in the next row among the monuments, but he never expected to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by such an act. In court, Gabe's defense was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their own on an extreme honeymoon, and the lack of flowers on the grave was her request, which sounded very strange and unlikely.
There's no telling how long the search for evidence would have dragged on if the cops had put on the exact same gear the newlyweds had and hadn't tried to stage that incident. Gabe said Tina drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face. It turned out it was impossible to put the mask on underwater by yourself unless you used another source of air, in this case, Tina's oxygen. In late November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and on June 5, 2009, Gabe's trial began, where he pleaded guilty, but only to failing to save his wife, so he was charged with negligent homicide and sent to prison for 18 months. After completing his sentence, Gabe returned home to the U.S., but a year later, the now U.S. court charged him with first-degree murder, the motive for which was to receive insurance payments after the death of his wife. Gabe's lawyer tried to defend his client, shifting all the blame on the diving company, that the employees of this company did not take care of the safety of tourists, and now, afraid of losing their license, and therefore the whole business, are trying to shift the blame on the unhappy husband who has already served his time in another country. As for the money received from the insurance company, the payout amounted to $33,000, while Gabe spent much more money on lawyers and additional expertise. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to insist that this spending was only because the husband could not assume that he would not be believed, and also the prosecutor refused to accept the fact that Gabe, with a degree in drowning rescue in hand, could not even save his wife. When Gabe had his say, he addressed the jury. "It's been 7 years since the tragedy, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about that terrible day. The public has pounced on me, blaming me for my wife's death, calling me a murderer. There wasn't a single person who looked me in the eye and said, 'Yes, I understand how bad you feel, but it's not your fault.' On the contrary, everyone just wants me dead. And here I can only understand my late wife's parents. Yes, they will never forgive me, no matter how much I kneel before them, and no matter how much I beg their forgiveness. You often hear the phrase, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child,' but I've never heard anyone say, 'I can't imagine what it's like to lose a wife, especially on a honeymoon.' If I can be accused of anything, it's that I didn't make enough effort to save Tina, but I've already received my punishment for that. Perhaps you all would have been satisfied if I had drowned with my wife then, 7 years ago. But I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't be able to rise from the bottom to the top. I just wanted to live, as I still want to live now." No evidence of Gabe's guilt was presented to the court. The jury found Gabe not guilty.
The dark mystery of the disappearance is solved 14 years later. Investigating certain crimes can take years or even decades due to a lack of evidence or witnesses. Sometimes investigations are intentionally misled to create confusion or send investigators down the wrong path. Many such cases eventually end up on the shelves of archives as unresolved. However, crimes involving life-ending actions and abuses of various degrees of severity generally have no statute of limitations, and investigations can be reopened at any time when new information surfaces. Cases related to the disappearance of individuals, particularly minors, are often solved on hot tracks. It is believed that the first 3 days are critical when there is a high likelihood of finding the person alive. Thereafter, the chances of a favorable outcome rapidly diminish. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Kruger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. The girl disappeared during the day on her way home from school, having traveled just a few dozen meters from her home. No evidence, leads, or witnesses were found, and although the investigation was periodically reopened, there was little hope of solving the crime. However, thanks to meticulous work by undercover agents, the criminal was eventually exposed. What is known about Georgina Kruger and her family? Georgina, or simply Gina Kruger, was born on April 11, 1992, in Munich, and was the middle child of 3 in a simple family. She grew up with her older brother Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and her younger sister Michelle, who was 2.5 years her junior. When Gina turned 11, her parents decided to separate, and her older brother, who was then 19, chose to live with their father. After the divorce, the girls were primarily raised by their mother Vesma and their grandmother on their mother's side. Both girls did well in school, were involved in music and dance, and were creative by nature. The family lived modestly, and while their father maintained contact with his ex-wife and daughters, he was more focused on supporting his elder son, whom he funded through school and supported in various ways. In June 2006, Vesna moved with her mother and daughters to Berlin, where she had been offered a well-paying job. The family settled in the Moabit district at house number 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st, the sisters attended one of the best local schools, which, although located in a different district, was accessible by bus. Vesna was very pleased with her new job and had big plans for the future. But soon the peaceful and measured life of the family was shattered. She dreamed of becoming an actress. From childhood, Gina loved to sing and dance, engaging in these activities seriously and with full dedication. Inspired by Indian films, she dreamed of an acting career and enthusiastically participated in school theater, as well as attending acting and stage speech courses. Teachers working with young Kruger noted that she definitely possessed the necessary talents, and thus predicted her future success and fame. Moreover, the girl had a bright, expressive appearance, a slender feminine figure, and was quite tall for her age. She took meticulous care of herself, keeping up with fashion trends, striving to dress stylishly, and used decorative cosmetics skillfully and intelligently. It's worth noting that Georgina applied makeup as well as professional makeup artists, often doing makeup for her friends and neighbors back in Munich. In Berlin, during the summer holidays, she actively attended various castings, trying to break into the big screen or television. She managed to appear in crowd scenes a few times, but these were very inconspicuous episodes. However, on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, luck finally smiled at her. She auditioned for a guest role in the television series, Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. Gina was supposed to receive a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast, discuss details, and invite her to sign a contract.
The new beauty in town. In her new school, the young beauty caused a real stir from the first day, capturing the attention of all the boys in her class. However, she struggled to get along with the girls as they openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. Her classmates were slow to accept her into their group and communicated with her reluctantly, although Gina was sociable, friendly, and open, avoided conflicts, and tried to interact with all the kids in the class. The teenage girl was indeed very beautiful, danced well, sang, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to try herself as a photo model. She agreed, but unfortunately, she never made it to the planned photo session in early October. Gina dreamed that one day she would make it to Hollywood or Bollywood, where she would act in movies. She imagined herself on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals, among celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, film awards, and was ready to work hard on herself to achieve her desires. The schoolgirl almost made it happen, when suddenly she disappeared without a trace, a few miles from home. So the schoolgirl was awaiting confirmation of her role in the TV series, and she had no doubts about it. All weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the upcoming call from the studio, which was set to decide her fate. She was excited and inspired, already imagining herself on set and working on her lines. On Monday, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school in the morning. She was supposed to return home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and since the call was expected in the late afternoon, Gina asked her grandmother to answer all calls, promising not to linger anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly for Kruger. Her classmates noticed that she seemed tense, constantly checking the time, and unable to focus on her lessons. Since she hadn't told anyone about her participation in the casting, her anxious state was interpreted differently by everyone. When school ended, Georgina, having gathered her belongings, hurried to the nearest bus stop, got on bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed home. After traveling 3 stops, she got off at Rue Rettenover, which was a short distance from her house. However, she never made it home, vanishing somewhere halfway from the stop to her apartment. Georgina Kruger was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. Search for the missing schoolgirl. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the grandmother, who was waiting for the granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was supposed to return first, and Michelle a bit later, since she had additional classes at the music school that day. But the older granddaughter did not show up, which was very strange because she was eagerly awaiting the call and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, the grandmother grew anxious and started calling Gina to find out where she had vanished, but the schoolgirl's phone was turned off. Subsequent attempts to reach her also failed. The anxiety grew, and when Vesna returned from work and learned that her daughter was missing and her mobile was unreachable, she realized something serious had happened. The first thing the mother did was call the school, where she was informed that Kruger had attended all her classes and had left by bus as usual. Then the woman contacted several of her daughter's friends, hoping that the girls had simply got caught up talking or had stopped at the cafe on their way home, but they said that Georgina was in a hurry and had headed straight home. The concerned women then went to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. However, the law enforcement initially took a skeptical view, suspecting that the schoolgirl might have gone on a date, visited someone among friends, or had an argument with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere in a park. After exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager was nowhere to be found in any of the anticipated locations, detectives began checking reports of accidents and calling hospitals, assuming that the girl might have encountered trouble, suffered an injury, or been harmed on her way home from school. But Gina had not been admitted to any hospital either. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Kruger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect the scent of living or deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Vanished into thin air. Law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, spoke with workers at local stores and cafes, but no one had seen Georgina, and even dogs could not pick up her trail. By the next morning, flyers with the schoolgirl's photos and requests for any information about her had been posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station reporting sightings of a similar-looking girl in different parts of the city, but unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Concurrently, investigators began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those who had been released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals and those who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings were found, as if she had never existed at all. False lead. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended as there were no leads, not a single clue, and no idea which direction to pursue. However, about a year after Georgina's disappearance, an anonymous call came into the police station, with the unknown caller claiming that the girl's body rested at the bottom of a nearby lake. Authorities were unable to identify the caller, but they clung to this piece of information and decided to investigate it. For several weeks, highly skilled divers combed the lakebed using advanced equipment. It can be said with certainty that they examined virtually every inch, but found no trace of Kruger. The lead turned out to be false, but it nevertheless rekindled public interest in the case. The media actively discussed and wrote about the missing girl again, so it was decided to conduct another search operation. The police re-interviewed neighbors and brought in search dogs, although it was clear that this would likely yield no results. The dogs had been unable to pick up the girl's scent on the day of her disappearance, so there was little hope for success after a whole year. Investigators were confident that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Kruger family members refused to believe this. Vesna concocted a legend for herself, according to which her daughter had run away to India and was now starring in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her younger daughter. The monster next door. Search efforts periodically resumed, and in 2016, nearly a decade after a girl's disappearance, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police to complain about a neighbor who was actively inviting underage girls over to his place. This neighbor turned out to be a 35-year-old immigrant from Turkey named Ali K. He was legally married, raising 3 children, and tried to appear as an exemplary family man to those around him, but in reality, he was not. Upon closer inspection of Ali, and after studying his personality, the police were horrified, as 4 years prior, he had already been under investigation. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl, promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building, struck her on the head, and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, then gave her a paper napkin to wipe her tears, and helped her tidy up.
The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together, and when the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing, and he, trying to reason with her, pushed her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body, but the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven as the man had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife, Melek, fully supported her husband and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, the man only received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, now as the police took up the investigation of the disappearance of Kruger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Ali K did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts, was a regular visitor to the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he made acquaintances with different people who treated him to food and drinks. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, ask them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali most resembled the role of Georgina's abductor, but the police had nothing against him in this case. New investigation. Nevertheless, the Kruger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It turned out that 10 years ago, he had been questioned along with other neighbors, and his basement had been inspected. But specifically, Ali's storage room had not been checked because, firstly, there was no reason to, and secondly, according to residents, the door always had a lock, so only the owner could access it. Ali himself had been an active participant in the search operation at that time and was one of its most engaged members. Despite the fact that the police had nothing concrete to charge K with, they decided to keep him under surveillance to learn as much as possible about him. Unofficial monitoring was organized, and all his phone calls were intercepted. Soon this provided initial results, and detectives discovered that the man had significant debts unknown to his wife. He had lost about 10,000 euros in poker and had no idea how to get out of this predicament. The investigation decided to focus on this aspect. Undercover agents. The decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully, so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans.
After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee, when suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table. He took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role, then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly, and their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect, as the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer. He boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the story, whose goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Malek, and try to uncover any secrets the husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them to get along, after which all four started socializing as families. Malek was a sociable woman, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and was convinced that her husband was a very good person, just unlucky with jobs. But now everything would change. Soon, Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Kruger case and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Malek knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. Good cop, bad cop. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The Kay family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children, but no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Moreover, maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and signed a sham employment contract with the man to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step.
In November 2017, sitting in the agent's car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Clore doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken a life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot, and he burned with desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl, who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. But no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Courier's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste of a landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict. The hearings in this case lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered to the criminal. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Cora's trust. But in reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No other evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession. However, his detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of this man's guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgina's disappearance, Ali K. was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of ever being released. His wife, Melek, never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. On the night of December 1st, 2010, Staff Sergeant Nathan Payette was in a hurry. He was late for duty at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. By a strange coincidence, his alarm clock, which never failed to go off, did not ring today. Nathan woke up at 11 p.m. and woke up his wife, Michelle. He took a shower, said goodbye to his family. Then he went out to the garage. He was about to put on his uniform and start the car. Suddenly, loud shots rang out from behind. Mr. Payette's children and wife came running to the noise. On the doorstep stood Nathan, bleeding and staggering from side to side. It was obvious that he was about to fall. Michelle was terrified and rushed towards her husband to pick him up, but not in time. The father of the family collapsed to the floor. Around 11:30 p.m., 911 received a call. "My husband has been shot. He's bleeding. Help him!" Mrs. Payette screamed into the phone. The dispatcher immediately explained to the woman how to administer first aid. Michelle tried to give artificial respiration to her spouse. However, it did not bring relief. After the arrival of rescuers, he was taken to the nearest hospital. Doctors did everything possible to save the patient. Despite this, it was not possible to bring the young man back to life. The neck wound became fatal for 28-year-old Nathan Payette. After Mrs. Payette was informed of her husband's death, her life was divided into before and after. An exemplary family man, a valiant serviceman, was murdered on the doorstep of his own home in Las Vegas. His death caused a public outcry. Relatives, acquaintances, and just concerned citizens were waiting for explanations from the police. Who could decide to such lawlessness? What motives pursued the criminal and was subsequently brought to justice? These and other questions we will try to analyze together with you. Nathan Joseph Villagomez Payette was born on February 12, 1982, in the village of Taumaneng, Guam. The territory of the island is not part of the United States of America, but it is a possession of the United States. At the same time, the United States determines foreign policy and does not interfere in internal affairs. Guam is a small island in the Pacific Ocean. Due to its paradisiacal beauty and historical past, this area is especially popular among tourists. Nathan was not only born in an amazing region, he was also fortunate to have a large and loving family. He had 3 brothers, Matthew, Anthony, Eric, and 1 sister, Carmela. The children were very friendly and helped their parents in everything. Nathan himself was different from the others in that he never caused trouble. He was a caring child at home and a diligent student at school. The boy was very sociable, so he easily made friends. He was the soul of the company. His name was always on the rumor. Perhaps there was no one who did not want to communicate with him, recalled about him brother Eric. Living near the ocean, Nathan loved swimming from childhood. Later, he began surfing. He spent all his free time on the beach, enjoying the sun and life. Nathan met his future wife during his studies at South High School. The educational institution was located in the neighboring town of Santa Rita. Michelle Ann Vonta-Chuck was attracted to him at first sight. Young people began to spend time together. With each day, their affection for each other only grew. They never parted. Together, they studied at school, prepared for classes, helped with household chores. Strong teenage friendship was replaced by tender love. When Michelle was 16 years old, a terrible grief befell her family. Her mother died. Therefore, the girl spent all her free time helping her sister. Melissa, the eldest of Chuck's family, took on the role of mother and mistress of the house. Nathan supported her in everything she did and helped to look after the younger children. In 2000, after graduation, Nathan decided to propose to Michelle. The girl happily accepted. Their families did not have the opportunity to have a wedding. Therefore, the couple, with the blessing of their parents, decided to move in together. To earn a living, the guy got a job as a receptionist in a local hotel. He earned not badly. There was enough money. However, like all young people, Nathan and Michelle were ambitious. They made plans for their own home and independence. Soon their son Dion was born in the Pyatt family. The income was no longer enough to cover the necessary expenses. Therefore, the guy thought about a job that could provide his family with a decent existence. This desire led Nathan to join the Air Force. After graduation, Nathan was assigned to the Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage, Alaska. Michelle was left alone with the baby, but the family had money. In addition, after a while, the young people's dream came true. They built their own house. In it was born a second child, a daughter named Niara. The head of the family made success in the military field. This favored the desire to achieve everything that he and his wife had previously been deprived of. Finally, 6 years after their engagement, Michelle and Nathan had a big wedding. My mom was extremely proud that her youngest son was the first to go out and achieve something, Eric said. In 2006, Nathan was transferred to the Davis-Monthan military base in Arizona. He was promoted to the position of weapons loading team leader for the A-10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft of one of the Essex squadrons. There he also trained in logistics training and material management. Nathan definitely loved his job and did it with dedication. Most importantly, he did it with the best of intentions. He was a son of his country. One of his co-workers characterized him. In 2007, Nathan and his family moved to Nellis Air Base. The new job was located near Las Vegas, Nevada. There, the young man was assigned as an assistant junior officer in charge of the supply section for maintenance of combat aircraft. Along with professional growth, the family of the protagonist grew. Soon the Pyatt couple had 2 more sons, Drawson and David. Michelle fell in love with Las Vegas. She thought it was the best place to live, so Nathan decided to make her happy. He chose the most suitable house for a large family, spacious and bright. In addition, the future family home was 30 to 40 minutes away from the military base. Nathan made the down payment with his savings. The only thing left to do was to divide the family's income and expenses wisely. Maybe he could save some money temporarily, at least until Mr. Pyatt's next prospects. At first, Michelle was delighted with her husband's surprise. She set about organizing the everyday life in the new house. However, over time, the demands of the couple began to grow. The family spent more than Nathan earned. The happiness of buying a new house began to fade. It is well known that financial difficulties have ruined the relationship of more than one couple. Nathan and Michelle were no exception to this axiom. The man realized that the deplorable situation had to be corrected. Therefore, in mid-2009, when the USA was at war with Iraq, Nathan enlisted as a volunteer. His departure took 6 months. During this time, the family's condition improved considerably, which Nathan could not help but enjoy. After a short rest at home, Sergeant Pyatt decided to return to Iraq. While Nathan was risking his life, Michelle was overcome by anxiety. She had intrusive thoughts. The prospect of being alone with 4 children frightened her. Accustomed to a certain standard of living, she found it hard to imagine otherwise. To take her mind off her worries, Mrs. Pyatt took a job. The firm that took the new hire was a corporate credit card telemarketing firm. Employment brought variety and new acquaintances to the woman's routine. In addition, Michelle wanted to have her own safety cushion. She did not rule out having her own business in the future, so she actively engaged in self-development. She began to attend the School of Aesthetics. Everything went on as usual while Nathan was at home. When he left, Michelle became bored. The birth of the children, the endless travels, and her husband's service cooled the relationship between the couple. Nathan was away for long periods of time, and Michelle wanted to be loved and desired, so she took a lover. It became her colleague, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez, 31-year-old handsome and a local womanizer. Plus, the man was devious and dishonest. He spent 2007 in prison for forgery and attempted theft. Michelle couldn't resist Sweet Rudy. That's what they jokingly called Michael behind his back. By the end of 2009, Nathan returned home. It seemed that the distance and the ordeal went in favor of the family relationship. However, this was not the case. The wife was playing a double game. She did not want to lose her husband, having an infatuation on the side. Therefore, she tried to please him in every way. Nathan was fascinated by the changes that had taken place in her appearance and character. The children had been growing up without a father for a long time, which had a negative impact on their education. He decided not to leave his family for a long time. It did not occur to him that the striking changes Michelle could be associated with treason. So pure and faithful was Nathan himself. In Las Vegas, a man found a good way to earn money. In order to get double pay, he started working night shifts. In addition, Nathan took up private teaching. He developed training for simplified baseball for young children. As for Michelle's pretense, it didn't last long. As soon as the usual standard of living began to fall, the spouse changed her attitude to the opposite. After a while, the problems in the couple's relationship went beyond. At Thanksgiving in 2010, the young family was visited by brother Eric and his wife Veronica. For the first time, the guests sensed the tension between the Payets. They had changed beyond recognition. It seemed that the former feelings between Michelle and Nathan completely disappeared. The couple could not hide from outsiders not only personal, but also financial problems, almost empty pantry and refrigerator. A week later. On December 1st, 2010, a strange communication took place between Mrs. Payet and Mr. Rodriguez. At 11:12 p.m., Michelle received a text message from Michael. "Hope you are feeling better," the man wrote. "Van Dyke's contract for tomorrow is almost finalized." 2 minutes later, he sent another text. "If you're not feeling well, let me know. I'll give you a couple days to rest. Remember, I appreciate your help." At 11:19 p.m., Michelle replied, "My husband just recently woke me up. Right now, he is trying to leave the house, but I think he's going to be late today. LOL, I'm sorry the contract is giving you so much trouble." A couple months before the tragedy, Michelle didn't want to be with Nathan, nor was she going to leave him, because she realized that breaking up wouldn't do anything, except headaches and empty pockets. "I don't think he will forgive me and support me after the divorce," Michelle thought. "The alimony would hardly be enough for a normal life." In addition, Mrs. Payet was aware of her husband's military insurance. In the event of his death, payments totaling about $65,000 were due to the wife. These sinful thoughts did not give rest to the woman's sick mind. One day she shared them with Michael. Surprisingly, he was intrigued. So the terrible idea of Nathan's former lover turned into a coming plan. Mr. Rodriguez knew that Michelle and he could not do it alone. It was too complicated. So he enlisted his friend, Corey Alexis Hawkins, in the criminal scheme. The 33-year-old mercenary had about 9 convictions, each one of them related to theft or fraud. Corey was a hardened criminal, so he agreed to help on the condition of a substantial reward. He estimated his participation at $20,000. After thinking hard, Michelle and Michael agreed. A little later, a couple more people joined their group: 23-year-old Jessica Austin, Corey's girlfriend, and her friend Shannon. By the way, Jessica's friend was not particularly intelligent. She earned her living by starring in adult movies.
Shannon was offered 5% of Corey and Jessica's royalties for her help. The fabulous money turned the woman's head. The original plan was to shoot Nathan in his Chevrolet Tahoe. After that, the criminals intended to drive the car with the man's body and leave it in the parking lot of one of the apartment complexes. Jessica had to buy the things necessary for the crime: men's gloves, a car cover, and a fragrance. Shannon's job was to provide an alibi for Michael. If anything, she had to confirm that on the day of the murder, Michael was by her side. On December 1st, 2010, Michelle felt ill. She deviated from her usual schedule and reported home at around 5:30 p.m. Michelle did not normally arrive so early. Her classes at beauty school were ending late, around 10:40 p.m. Mrs. Payette's foot crossed the threshold of the house just 5 minutes before Nathan left for work. On that unfortunate day, Michelle saw her husband sleeping on the sofa. She woke him up and suggested that they go upstairs to lie together. He didn't object. That was the last night the couple spent together. Late for work, Nathan went downstairs. Just at that time, Michelle was corresponding with Michael. In order not to arouse suspicion, the accomplices corresponded using code words. The instigator himself, along with his accomplice, was sitting in a black Cadillac SRX. The car was parked just ahead of the future victim's house. The perpetrators wore latex gloves so as not to leave any traces. Michael realized that the sergeant's military training could play into the latter's hands, so he decided to take him by surprise and approached him from behind. Michael drew his pistol and shot Nathan 5 times in the back. Michael quickly ran out of the garage, got into his car, and drove away. The perpetrators then fled to a previously prepared place. They burned the clothes in the fireplace and disposed of the rest of the evidence. After that, Michael with Shannon went to the hotel. In this way, the couple wanted to create an alibi. In parallel, Jessica engaged in a thorough cleaning of the apartment in which they stayed. Together with the emergency services, police officers arrived at the scene. They were stunned by what had happened. The neighborhood where the Payette family lived was considered one of the exemplary ones. Detective Todd Williams first decided to examine the scene of the shooting. The garage door was unlocked. There was a noticeable odor of iron inside the room. Blood was smeared on the walls in the car, and traces of it were also visible on the floor. Next to Nathan's uniform were his keys and wallet. Since the valuables were untouched, a robbery murder was ruled out. After examining the scene, Detective Laurie Anderson decided to talk to the victim's wife. Michelle explained what had happened. For some reason, she added that the family was struggling financially. This gave the police some ideas. Maybe Nathan was hiding something from his wife. For example, a gambling addiction, debts, or an affair on the side. At least that would have cleared up the attack. Besides, all the evidence pointed to Nathan being deliberately set up. The police examined the victim's cell phone. It contained only pictures of his wife and children. This convinced the officers that Mr. Payette was a decent man. The investigation continued. The next step in the search for the perpetrator was to canvass the neighborhood. Statistically speaking, there's always someone who saw or heard something. This was the case with Nathan. Some neighbors reported that they had seen a car parked near the Payette house. The car was driven by a man wearing a brown sweatshirt. After shots were fired, the vehicle immediately drove away. Detectives finally had a lead. Nathan's family was shocked to learn what had happened. His family was on the first flight out of Guam. They were waiting for answers. His mother, Carmelita Payette, cried the whole way. The woman couldn't believe her son had died so early. The relatives finally reached the victim's home. Michelle threw herself into her mother-in-law's arms and then lost consciousness. Nathan's mother sensed something unnatural in her daughter-in-law's reaction. For some reason, the fainting seemed faked. The investigators decided to talk to Mrs. Payette again. They asked her about the car that the witnesses had seen. Unexpectedly, she said that her colleague, Michael Rodriguez, had a similar car. Why Michelle gave out this information remains unclear. However, thanks to her, the puzzle began to take shape. Police later determined that Michelle had simply blabbed the truth, or the plan the perpetrators were hatching was flawed. Detectives looked into Michael's identity. The man's criminal record heightened suspicions. He was brought in for questioning, to which he responded calmly. Mr. Rodriguez said that on the day of Nathan's murder, At around 9 p.m., he went out shopping. In the supermarket, the man met an interesting girl named Shannon. From his words, they had a long conversation, after which they decided to continue their acquaintance in the hotel room. Michael explained that they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. To verify the man's words, the officers called Shannon. She did indeed confirm the romantic encounter. However, the detectives sensed a catch, so the next step was to examine the information in Mrs. Payet's phone. Specialists managed to recover the correspondence Michelle had with Michael for a year. Their communication was interesting. On the day of Nathan's murder, the couple discussed a contract with a certain Van Dyke. The conversation was more like encryption than a business negotiation. It was probably how the two men planned the crime. Investigators were almost certain that both were involved, but sufficient evidence had not yet been obtained, so they decided to let Michael go until the circumstances of the case are clarified. After examining Michelle's cell phone, the detectives called her back in for questioning. She was visibly agitated and seemed to be hiding something. Michelle realized that the officers knew more than she wanted to know, so she told them about her affair with Michael. A little later, she confessed that a few months before her husband's death, she and her lover had decided to kill Nathan. The woman explained that the action was planned in order to obtain insurance payments. Mrs. Payet justified herself and assured that she had repented and changed her mind. It was as if she had changed her mind at one stage in the preparation of the crime. She felt sorry for her husband, and she even tried to interfere with the plan. So she turned off her husband's alarm clock. Michelle was counting on her accomplices not waiting for Nathan or missing him. But the investigators did not believe in the woman's remorse. Her correspondence eloquently testified otherwise. In addition, she sent Michael a cute smiley face right after she learned of her husband's death. After a while, Shannon came to the police station to confess. The woman must have realized her predicament. However, her involvement in the case was clearly embellished. She explained that Michael had forced her to provide an alibi. Jessica asked for my help. Her friends wanted to teach a big drug dealer a lesson. My job was only to cover up the involvement of one of the attackers. I thought it would be a way to get justice, she explained. She then added that on the night of the attack, Michael told the whole truth. Shannon assured police officers, "As soon as I realized I was being used, I immediately went to the police. In addition, I feared for my life. There is no telling what they would have done to me." The woman's words were confirmed by the hotel's CCTV footage. It became clear that Michael and Shannon arrived at the hotel not at 11 p.m., as Michael himself said, but at 11:40 p.m. Her testimony led detectives to Courier and Jessica. Courier had long denied any involvement in the case. He knew what a guilty plea would do to a repeat offender. But Jessica did reveal her role in the sinister plan. To honor the young sergeant's memory, Nathan's family and friends gathered on December 7, 2010, in the chapel at the Nellis base. Michelle decided to skip the ceremony. She was clearly not in the mood for it. Many comrades remembered the man's stamina and military hardiness.
The commander of the squadron told about the feats he had accomplished for his country and his family. Everyone characterized Nathan as a reliable comrade in arms. At the same time, they noted his modesty and decency. In his speech, Eric Payet recalled, "My brother has always been an example for me and the rest of my family. He truly loved life, was devoted to his wife and children. Everything Nathan ever did, he did in the name of his homeland, love, and friends." On December 9th, the remains of the slain man were transported to Guam. On December 15th, a requiem mass was held at St. Francis Church in Tamuning. Military honors were paid to the sergeant at the Piti City Cemetery on the island of Guam. His funeral was spectacular. The cortege consisted of 36 motorcycles. Upon arrival at the burial site, 6 officers carried out a casket covered with a U.S. flag. Afterward, 21 shots shook the sky. Nathan Payet was given a hero's farewell. Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, and Jessica Austin were arrested without bail on December 8, 2010. The next day, the same fate awaited Michelle Payet. The police feared for the mental state of the accused. She was placed under surveillance to prevent her from committing suicide. On January 4, 2011, in Clark County District Court, the 4 accomplices were read the charges. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, and murder with a firearm. Michael and Corey were additionally charged with possession of a firearm. The trials dragged on for 3 years. Some of the defendants denied involvement. Armed with a strong defense team, the defendants filed more than one motion. Their aim was to exclude certain evidence and proofs from the case. However, the court rejected all the applications. They only delayed the inevitable punishment by postponing the sessions from one date to another. On September 21, 2015, the trial for the murder of Nathan Payette did take place. Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first to stand trial. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. On September 29, 2015, the man was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael's appeal of the sentence was denied. At the time the sentence was announced, the defendant expressed no emotion. Apparently, he did not regret the crime he had committed. The trial of Michelle Payette took place in a Las Vegas court a month later. The woman continued to insist that she had changed her mind about killing her husband. When the judge allowed Michelle to say a few words in her defense, she turned to the parents of the murdered man. With tears in her eyes, she apologized to them. "I loved Nathan and our children. I was very confused and made a big mistake," Michelle pronounced and once again fainted. The prosecutor said she did not believe the defendant wanted to thwart the conspiracy. There was a lot of evidence to the contrary. No one could understand how a woman, a mother of 4 children, could become so cold-blooded. The judge sided with the prosecution. Michelle was clearly involved in the crime, at least more than she claimed in court. Michelle soon pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm. This helped her avoid capital punishment. The Payette family also asked the court not to impose the death penalty on the former relative. At the end of the hearing, the judge called Michelle's crime incomprehensible and unfathomable. In October 2015, it was the turn of a third defendant, Corey Alexis Hawkins. The man also agreed to a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. Corey was sentenced to life in prison. His attorney's petition to ever get parole was denied. The judge reasoned that the defendant helped plan the crime and was nearby at the time of the shooting. Jessica Austin also took a plea deal with prosecutors. She was later charged with conspiracy to commit murder. In March 2016, Michelle was given her final sentencing. She once again cited her unstable emotional state that led her to commit the crime. She again asked Nathan's family to ever forgive her. Carmelita Payette was a deeply religious person. She could see that her former daughter-in-law was remorseful for what she had done and was truly tormented by remorse. Her soul needed forgiveness. Therefore, Nathan's mother forgave Michelle in the courtroom. Afterwards, she added that the most important punishment in life, Michelle had already suffered. "Your children don't want to see you anymore. They're afraid you'll do to them what you did to their father," Carmelita explained. "Our family does not pursue the principle of an eye for an eye," Eric Payette informed her. "I think Michelle was shaken by her mother-in-law's words. Her family will move on without her, and the children will grow up knowing their mother is a murderer." Eric's wife, Veronica, also asked to speak out. She told Michelle that she hated her, after which she added that the relative dishonors the family name she carries. In pursuit of greed and the love of a man she didn't know, Michelle destroyed her family. She became the murderer of the man she once loved immensely, with whom she shared a bed and built a future. Could Michelle have imagined how her unbridled ambition would turn out? Hardly. This category of people lives in a perpetual pursuit of happiness without appreciating what they have. Nathan, unlike her, had lived his whole life giving of himself. He was often sleep-deprived, risked his health and his life. Thanks to this, the man fulfilled his beloved's dreams, but never found her recognition. The children of the Payette family will remain traumatized for life. They will hardly be able to create strong families and socialize. The painful experience of their parents will remain in front of their eyes for the rest of their days. There is only one good thing about this story. The 4 criminals will stay where they belong. Why did a friend eliminate an entire family? Have you ever pondered how well you truly know your friends, colleagues, or neighbors, and how much you can trust these individuals? Typically, friends know everything about us, but occasionally, people who only pretend to be our friends and gain our trust might later exploit our vulnerabilities if they wish to betray or harm us. For most people, friendship is one of those elements that bring meaning to life, thus supporting and assisting a friend is paramount. But sometimes the intent to help can turn into a tragedy. The tragic loss of a young woman named Christy Shawn and her husband Joseph Codd in 2015 shocked the quiet provincial town of Leicester, North Carolina. This incident was among the loudest and most brutal crimes in the history of this small community. At the time of the tragedy, the couple was joyously anticipating the addition of a new family member. However, the most horrifying aspect was that their perpetrator was someone they knew well, trusted, and considered a friend. Furthermore, they were not his only victims. Early life of Christy Shawn. Christy Maria Shawn Codd was born on September 3, 1976, in Madrid, Spain, and was the only child of American military personnel. Her father was a U.S. Air Force soldier, and due to his duties, he frequently moved from place to place with his wife and daughter following. The family did not stay long in Spain, and over the next few years they lived in various European countries before returning to the United States. The girl began her schooling in New Orleans, Louisiana, but within a year, the family moved to Texas, then to Illinois, and after that, Shawn spent several years in Latin American countries. Such a nomadic lifestyle had its benefits, as Christy spoke multiple languages from an early age and had the opportunity to experience the cultures and traditions of other countries. However, during her teenage years, she faced challenges in settling into new groups and making friends in new places. Just as she would start to settle in, it was time to pack up, move, and change schools and social circles. Yet, it was precisely because of the constant changes that she developed excellent communication skills. Christy easily found common ground with various people and was known as a sweet, sociable, and charming young woman. Additionally, from an early age, she actively participated in sports, including gymnastics and swimming, and for some time, she took kickboxing classes. When Christy finished school, her father retired from the military, and the family settled in Biloxi, Mississippi. There, she finally made real friends and discovered a new hobby: cooking. The teenager enjoyed preparing various dishes, experimented a lot in the kitchen, and her culinary masterpieces indeed deserved attention and praise. Eventually, she decided to pursue further development in this area and completed culinary courses. Her parents thought she would become a professional chef, but unexpectedly, she also discovered her talent for acting. Actress and culinary TV star. A beautiful and ambitious young woman brimming with talent, enrolled in an acting academy and moved to Los Angeles. There, broad prospects opened before her, and she intelligently seized every opportunity to make her mark. Christy appeared in commercials, performed on the theater stage, and also took part in some high-profile Hollywood productions as an extra or stunt performer. Specifically, she had a minor role in the Terminator franchise, performing quite risky stunts. In 2000, the young woman graduated from the academy, but by that time, she had not landed any significant or notable roles, despite her striking appearance and evident talent.
She then decided to focus on her culinary skills and also on sports, turning these two passions into a quite profitable business. Christy participated in several popular culinary TV shows which made her well known, turning her into a popular and recognizable figure. She made it to the finals of one season of The Next Food Network Star. But unfortunately, the blonde did not win, as the judges had mixed reviews of her culinary experiments. However, Shawn was not greatly dismayed, as she managed to attract considerable attention to herself. Thousands of people followed her on social media, keeping up with her life and creations. She actively promoted a healthy lifestyle, gave advice on proper nutrition, and even developed her own exercise routines to maintain good physical condition. About a year later, Christy founded and began successfully developing her own catering company, which provided banquet services for various events and also retailed prepared culinary products. Her business was distinctive in that it focused on proper and healthy eating. And additionally, the menu featured her own original recipes, which she created and perfected. Soon, the young woman contemplated starting her own farm, which would grow healthy and environmentally friendly produce. This would help her expand her business in the catering industry. At the same time, she conducted online courses on proper nutrition and developed several other projects. Fateful encounter on TV. In 2012, Christy met Joseph Timothy Codd, better known as JT, who worked as a casting director in television, responsible for selecting participants and actors for various high-rated projects. They first met at a studio in Los Angeles at the casting for a culinary show that the young woman wanted to participate in, and they instantly clicked. Joseph was nearly 7 years older than Christy, had been married before but was in the process of divorcing at the time they met. He was utterly charmed by the beauty and charisma of this delightful blonde, and he began to court her. The young woman was not averse to his attentions, and soon they began a romantic relationship. Joseph shared and supported the ideas of his beloved, and together they began to work on the project of their own farm. Soon after, the couple decided to leave Los Angeles and moved from sunny California to North Carolina. They sold Christy's quite successful and well-established catering business. Joseph sold his house in Hollywood, and they invested all the proceeds in buying a large piece of land in the town of Leicester. The couple acquired a spacious and cozy house, as well as a nearly 1-acre plot of land to realize their dream. The man continued to collaborate with TV channels, but now worked remotely, while the woman actively worked on developing her personal blog about proper nutrition and a healthy lifestyle. They were an ideal couple, with their relationship marked by love and harmony. Soon, the lovebirds decided to formalize their relationship, and in August 2014, they had a lavish wedding attended by several hundred guests, including relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even some fans of the famous couple. They were truly happy and full of plans for their future together. 3 months after the wedding, the newlyweds learned that they were going to become parents for the first time. Their joy knew no bounds. After the new year, during a routine ultrasound examination, the doctor told the couple that they were expecting a daughter, and a few days later, during a phone call with her mother, Christy mentioned that they had decided to name their firstborn Skylar. Everything was going perfectly, and the pregnancy was progressing smoothly, but the couple's happiness was tragically short-lived.
The mysterious disappearance of the Codds, Christy was 5 months pregnant and actively preparing for the arrival of their baby. She almost daily called her parents, who lived in another state, sharing updates on her well-being and chatting with her mother, sometimes for an hour at a time. However, on March 13, 2015, Christy's mother was unable to reach her daughter, but initially did not think much of it. The situation repeated the next day. Calls went through, but no one answered. Her son-in-law's phone also went unanswered. When by March 15th, both spouses' phones were turned off, Christy's mother became alarmed. Since Christy and Joseph's parents lived in other states, they couldn't quickly check on their children's home to ensure everything was all right. Therefore, Christy's mother called a close friend of her daughter, a woman named Cecily, who lived nearby and could check on them at their home. When a friend arrived at the Codd residence, she saw that both spouses' personal cars were parked at the house. However, the front door was locked, and no one responded to knocks and shouts. The couple's phones had been off for 3 days, which was also highly suspicious. Through a window, Cecily saw that the couple's beloved dogs, who they cherished and would never willingly leave alone, were locked inside one of the rooms. The woman decided to walk around the house and noticed that the back door lock had been forcefully broken, indicating that someone had attempted to enter, or had indeed entered, the home. She immediately informed Christie's mother by phone, who then promptly called the police. The responding officers confirmed that the back door had been broken into and discovered disarray inside, indicating that someone had been searching for something. According to the family, some valuables had been stolen, including a jewelry box belonging to the homeowner, and a safe in the couple's bedroom had been breached. However, there were no signs of blood, struggle, or evidence that the couple had been detained or taken by force. Additionally, the perpetrator had acted very cautiously, leaving no fingerprints or DNA traces. The relatives clung to the faint hope that 45-year-old Joseph and his 38-year-old pregnant wife Christy were still alive, but the experienced officers were not optimistic in their forecasts. Suspicious neighbor. In the initial days, the investigation simply stalled. No clues or even somewhat significant evidence could be found. The missing couple had no enemies or ill-wishers, and reconstructing what had happened was challenging even in broad strokes. The spouses' phones were left at home, last used on March 12th. Only incoming calls were recorded the next day, after which the devices died. The police decided to question the couple's neighbors to see if they had noticed anything strange or suspicious recently. An interesting detail emerged. A neighbor living across the street saw another local resident throwing a large bundle into a trash bin near the Codd's home on the morning of March 15th. At the time, he didn't think much of it. But when he learned of the couple's disappearance, he thought the information might be useful to the investigation. Checking the contents of the bins was no longer possible, as the trash had been taken to the dump just the day before, and now any potential evidence would need to be searched for there. But first, the police wanted to speak with the person who had discarded the strange bundle. He turned out to be a 36-year-old Robert Jason Owens, who lived on the same street, was well acquainted with the couple, and even considered a close family friend. Robert was a handyman and had helped Christy and Joseph when they first moved into their new home. They became friends, and later the couple invited their new friend and neighbor to their own wedding. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious about this, except that other locals described Owens as a strange and unpredictable person. Horrific discovery and shocking confessions. On March 16th, Robert was summoned to the police station for questioning, initially denying any involvement in the couple's disappearance and claiming ignorance about the bundle mentioned. There wasn't much to charge him with initially, beyond the unsubstantiated claims of another neighbor. However, that evening, the situation dramatically changed after the very same large, strange bundle was found at the landfill. Inside were items from the missing couple's home, including Robert's clear fingerprints and DNA traces found on partially burnt clothing belonging to the couple, a blanket and a throw from their home, all stained with blood. This evidence confirmed police suspicions that Christy and Joseph were no longer alive. Doubts were dispelled when police searched the suspect's home and found charred human skeletal remains in his wood stove. Robert was then brought in as a suspect in the brutal elimination of his neighbor and the neighbor's pregnant wife. Despite his denials and inconsistent statements, he eventually confessed after several hours, and his admissions were truly shocking. He admitted to the double fatal incident but claimed it was accidental. According to him, on the evening of March 12th, he decided to visit his friend's home but swerved off the road to avoid hitting a dog, getting stuck in the mud. He walked to the Codd's home and asked for help to push his car out. The helpful and responsive couple agreed to assist, and while they were pushing the car, Robert, sitting at the wheel, accidentally confused the gas and brake pedals, striking and running over the couple. Terrified, he believed he would be accused of taking their lives, so he chose not to call the police or emergency services, instead deciding to cover up the incident. Robert claimed he returned to the Codd's house, broke into the back door, and took blankets from the bedroom to move the bodies, which he wasn't sure were deceased. He wrapped the bodies, placed them in the bed of his pickup, and drove them to his home, where he dismembered them in his own bathroom using a saw and a small axe. He then fired up his stove and began incrementally throwing pieces of his friends' bodies into the fire, hoping they would burn completely. The blood-soaked clothing, blankets, and footwear of the deceased he oddly chose not to burn, but instead packed into a trash bag and disposed of in a dumpster, assuming that once the trash was taken to the landfill, no one would be able to find anything. After all this, Robert claimed he decided to stage a burglary, though in reality, he had robbed his friend's home himself, stealing money and valuables, which he pawned the next day, unsolved crime. The cruelty with which Robert disposed of his friends' bodies and the eerie calmness with which he recounted the events shocked even seasoned police officers. In his home, they found a saw and an axe stained with blood, skin, and bone fragments of the deceased. The accused hadn't even bothered to clean the tools or attempt to hide them, confident that the investigation would never lead to him since he had left no traces at the Codd's house. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bone fragments found in Owens's stove belonged to the missing couple. Law enforcement decided to delve deeper into the suspect's background. Robert was unmarried, had no children, and barely maintained any contact with his relatives. He had previously lived in Asheville, North Carolina, but in 2000, he bought land in Leicester and later built a house there. It turned out that his name was linked to an unresolved crime from 15 years prior that occurred in Asheville. In 2000, Robert's close friend Zeb Wing Quinn, who was only 18 at the time, mysteriously disappeared. Robert and Zeb had known each other since school, lived nearby, and were friends. Zeb was undergoing military training and also worked part-time at Walmart. On January 2nd, 2000, after finishing his shift, Quinn met with Robert, planning to drive to Leicester to buy a new car, but he never returned home. A few days later, his Mazda Protege was found in another part of town, parked with its headlights on. Inside, a heart was drawn on the window with red lipstick. The car's owner was never found. The car also had damage and scratches with traces of paint from another vehicle. The last person to see Zeb was Robert, whose car also had damage, and it turned out that the scratches contained paint particles from Zeb's car. Robert told a peculiar and implausible story. Shortly after they headed towards Leicester, Zeb blinked at him to stop. Zeb said he received a message on his pager and urgently needed to use a payphone. He asked Robert to wait and drove off to the nearest gas station, but returned 10 minutes later, looking frantic. Said their plans had changed, and then drove off in an unknown direction, hitting his friend's car in the process. It was also discovered that Zeb had a romantic relationship with a woman named Misty Taylor, whose former boyfriend, Wesley Smith, had threatened Zeb with harm if he didn't stop seeing Misty. Taylor, Smith, and Owens were questioned in this case, but due to a lack of evidence, all three were released. Additionally, Misty and Wesley had alibis, which was not the case for Robert. A significant amount of money, which Zeb had with him in case he decided to buy the car, and his pager disappeared from his car, and it was never determined what message he had received, if any. The investigation leaned towards the theory that there was no message at all. Another oddity was that the day after Zeb's disappearance, a man called Walmart claiming to be him, stating he wouldn't be coming to work for the next few days due to illness. However, the colleague who answered the call thought the voice sounded strange and unfamiliar, not like Zeb at all. That phone call was traced to a Volvo plant where Robert worked. During questioning, Owens unexpectedly claimed that he made the call at his friend's request the night before Zeb sped away. No new evidence or witnesses were found, and the case remained unsolved, with Zeb Quinn listed as missing ever since. However, 15 years after these events, Owens was interrogated again, suspected of being directly involved in his longtime friend's disappearance. New, unexpected details of an old case. In June 2015, the case of Zeb Quinn was reopened from the archives, and the investigation resumed. However, at first, it seemed unlikely that law enforcement would uncover any new information. Robert recounted the same story he had told back in 2000, indicating he had nothing new to add. Nevertheless, the police decided to conduct a more thorough search of his property, where they stumbled upon something very peculiar. In a detached concrete slab at Owens's home, a strangely walled-off cavity was discovered, inside which were small, heavily charred human bone fragments. Unfortunately, the remains were too damaged to undergo DNA analysis, so it was impossible to definitively determine if they belonged to the missing Quinn. A neighbor's interview provided even more unexpected results. An elderly man living nearby remembered something from January 2000, when young Owens had just purchased the land and was starting to build his house. One evening, he started a fire that emitted a sickly, sweet, nauseating smell. The neighbor even confronted him because the wind was blowing the stench in his direction, nearly making him sick. Soon after, the fire pit was covered with concrete, which seemed highly unusual, but Robert claimed he planned to build a small fountain there, which he never did. The neighbor had forgotten about the foul-smelling fire until 15 years later when police showed up at the property. Ultimately, Owens confessed to being complicit in a crime, telling an entirely new story. According to him, Zeb was killed by his own uncle, Walter Owens, who had been hired by Wesley Smith to eliminate Misty's new boyfriend, whom he still loved. Robert claimed he was unaware at the time, and his uncle had asked him to lure the young man to a secluded spot. When the three of them ended up in a wooded area on the road to Leicester, the uncle ordered them to stop the car and then to signal Quinn to do the same. Once the young man stepped out, Walter shot him silently and then instructed his nephew to help dismember and package the body, which was burned on Robert's property that same night and encased in concrete. Interrogating Walter Owens was no longer possible, as he had died several years before his nephew's horrific confession. No evidence was found at the supposed crime scene, and the story sounded very unconvincing. Legal proceedings, plea agreement, and final verdict. Initially, Robert faced charges of first-degree double murder, murder of an unborn child, dismemberment and concealment of evidence, burglary, and robbery. All these charges could have led to the death penalty, but it was revealed that the defendant had long suffered from depression and mental disorders, taking powerful medication, which his lawyer used as a foundation for defense. Thanks to a well-constructed defense strategy, the accused could have been found insane and sent to a psychiatric clinic instead of prison, which neither the prosecution nor the victim's relatives found satisfactory. At the same time, the investigation into Quinn's case began, from which the criminal might also escape unpunished. In 2017, the defendant agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt in the murder of the Codds in exchange for a guaranteed removal of the death penalty from potential sentences. For this case, he was found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, dismemberment and incineration of bodies, burglary, and robbery. In total, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. In 2022, Owens made another plea deal with the authorities, this time regarding Quinn's case. However, he only admitted to complicity in murder and assisting in hiding the evidence. For this crime, he received an additional 12 years, added to his already effectively life sentence. After the sentencing, the murderer addressed the court, asking forgiveness from the relatives of the people he had killed. He again spoke of his innocence, attributing everything to an unfortunate accident and citing his mental disorder and the influence of strong medication, which impaired his judgment. However, the relatives of Christy and Joseph Codd, as well as Quinn's family, did not believe him. They have never reconciled with the term unintentional murder and believed that in both cases, the man acted deliberately and for selfish motives. It's often said that life really begins after 40. A wealth of life experience contributes to this. For some, maturity marks a period of gaining self-confidence because not everyone has lived their life the way they wanted. For example, Some people didn't know themselves or their true desires, so they followed others' advice instead. Or they might have chosen the wrong life partner. A fear of social judgment often led to taking the path of least resistance. Sometimes with age and the realization that half of one's life has passed, comes the liberation from old fears and complexes. For such individuals, turning 40 is a sort of blossoming. Once the kids are grown, they can spend more time on themselves, leave past relationships behind, and try to start new ones. Chaman Starbuck, a 42-year-old woman in our story today, believed this as well. But her new hopes did not come to fruition. On December 3, 2011, Chanine was found on the bedroom floor of her own home. She was lying on her back in a provocative pose. On her stomach was an erotic massager. It was clear that someone wanted to posthumously disgrace her. There was no doubt among the police that she had been criminally taken from life. Her body bore bruises and scrapes everywhere. Later, a medical examiner reported that some injuries were caused by the use of a stun gun. Other evidence suggested her body had been moved. However, the cause of Chamin's demise was strangulation. Detectives faced a tough task. They needed to establish the last hours of this mother of five's life and find the criminal. The disappearance of a mother of many. The police learned of the woman's lack of contact a day before the grim discovery. Initially, her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, raised the alarm. The 47-year-old man reported he had been unable to contact his wife since December 1st. Around 3 p.m., Chamin texted her daughter that she was unable to pick up the kids from school due to feeling unwell, and asked to wait for their father, whom she supposedly had informed of the change in plans. However, his phone was off, so he was unaware of the situation. Marshall and Serena, the younger brother and sister, were tired and hungry. Therefore, the 15-year-old Logan decided to call her older brother. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, located a couple of blocks from their home. Upon arrival, Austin reported that he too could not get in touch with their mother. Perhaps she had turned off her phone to rest and recover. The boy put the kids in the car and drove them to Clay's house. The man was not expecting them, but was genuinely pleased by the unexpected circumstances. After the divorce, the older children had stayed with him, and the three youngest with their mother. Therefore, the father decided to enjoy their company and did not disturb Chanin. Moreover, such incidents had happened before with her. Besides, he expected to see his former wife at the school basketball game that evening, but she never showed up. On December 2nd, Mr. Starbuck drove the children to school and headed to his ex-wife's home. The front door was locked, and the blinds were drawn. Since he didn't have a spare key, he tried to enter, but was unsuccessful. Clay then sent a message stating that if Janine did not show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the law enforcement. After waiting until the agreed time, he went to the police and explained the situation. 2 sheriff's deputies went to the provided address, but, finding nothing suspicious, returned. The officers suggested waiting another day. If she didn't make contact by then, he should come back. Disappointed, Clay went home and waited for news. The next day, he went to the station again. Unexpectedly, they told him that his wasn't the only report. A friend and Chamin's mother had also been unable to reach her. This was uncharacteristic of her. This time, the police approached the case more responsibly. 48 hours had passed since Mrs. Starbuck's disappearance, and several people were concerned. After obtaining the necessary permission, the police went to her home again. What secrets did Mrs. Starbuck's home hold? Upon arriving at the residence, officers broke the lock and entered. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery. At first glance, everything was in its place. However, the idyll was disrupted as soon as they entered the woman's bedroom. That's where the grim truth was revealed. Chamin Starbuck hadn't just disappeared, she had been brutally ended. It appeared she had just gotten up. Her bed was unmade, the blanket lay nearby. The sheet was missing from the bed, and the mattress cover was stained red. The deceased's cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts focused their attention on her room. They examined all available surfaces for fingerprints. Some had been wiped clean, but 12 latent prints were found on the massager's box and the bathroom mirror. Numerous traces were also found in common areas. For further DNA analysis, specialists took scrapings from under the nails, face, and neck of the body. Detectives suspected that the homeowner had been deprived of life after she got out of the shower, was then moved to the bed, and eventually dragged to the floor. Notably, the removed sheets were found in the washing machine. Perhaps the perpetrator wanted to remove evidence in this way. Clay sheds light on his ex-wife's lifestyle. By noon, Clay arrived at Chamin's house. He was eager to find out what had happened. The scene in his ex-wife's yard did not inspire positive thoughts. The perimeter of the building was cordoned off with yellow tape, and an ambulance and several police cars were parked near the lawn. Mr. Starbuck was the first to be informed of the woman's tragic end. The detectives needed to gather any information about the victim and her lifestyle. Therefore, after the ex-husband managed to calm down a bit, they questioned him. He explained that they had an arrangement. Every morning he picked up the younger kids and took them to school, and she picked them up after school. However, this routine was sometimes disrupted. That happened on the morning of December 1st, when his car broke down a couple of blocks from home. Usually, waking up early, he would drive around the neighborhood and warm up the car. That time, Clay texted Chamin and asked her to take the kids to school. He then went home to wait for it to warm up. Around 11 a.m., he tried to start the car again, but once more, it wouldn't start. Giving up, he went back inside to nap. Mr. Starbuck didn't notice as he slept for several hours. During that time, his cell phone died. To substantiate his claims, he showed the correspondence with his ex-wife. At first glance, everything added up. Moreover, Clay was very cooperative, handing over his cell phone, DNA material, and fingerprints. He also confessed that he had been worried about Chamin because the divorce had changed her and made her more vulnerable. When officers asked him to elaborate, he shared that, being single, the woman had registered on a dating site. As she remained attractive, she had a wide circle of admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing some of them simultaneously. Following his logic, one of these lovers might have sent Chamin to the afterlife. Unfortunately, he couldn't name anyone, as he didn't have such information.
Throughout the conversation, Starbuck desperately cried. He explained that it was difficult for him to accept the fact of his former lover's death and to speak of her in the past tense. After recording his statement, the officers sent the man home. Poor guy had to tell the children about their mother's death. Beginning of the investigation. The case involving Chamin Starbuck's demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Starbuck family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy confirmed a chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun and also revealed that she had 10 broken ribs. The injuries inflicted upon her head and body were severe and likely caused by a blunt object. The external appearance of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death. The expert estimated that her life was ended sometime between December 1st and 2. Scratches on her body suggested she had been moved. Because her neck bone was broken, the medical examiner stated that something soft was used during the act of strangulation, possibly a hand, a towel, or even a sheet. A slight clarity in the case emerged from the body samples taken, including male DNA, suggesting that the suspect might be among her close male acquaintances, starting from her ex-husband to secret admirers. Chamin's darker side. Hoping to catch his former wife's perpetrator quickly, Clay Starbuck cooperated fully with the investigation. He underwent an examination during which he agreed to document any injuries and damages. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might also have sustained injuries during the struggle. However, no such injuries were found on Clay's hands. Following him, the 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake were also examined. Questions arose only regarding the older son, whose hands bore old cuts, but these were attributed to his job in a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the children, some facts were established that were later clarified. Many of them knew that after the divorce, their mother often went on dates with men and did not approve of it. The teenagers had even seen explicit photos on her laptop, which led them to speculate that she might have been targeted by a predator operating online. It was clear that everyone loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her departure. However, they disagreed with the changes in her life. In a follow-up interview, Clay was more articulate. He blamed Shannon for the family discord. While he was away on business trips, she frequently saw other men. He even admitted that he suspected that Marshall might not be his son. Nevertheless, he loved him as his own. In his view, after their relationship ended, Shannon started to indulge excessively and not appropriate for her age. He disapproved of how she would drop the kids off at his place when going on another date, among other things. However, by this point, the investigators had managed not only to talk to him and the children. Having interviewed Shannon's relatives and some friends, the detectives formed their own picture of the deceased and her family. The rise and fall of the Starbuck family. Shannon was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana. She was the youngest in her family, spending her childhood with two brothers. Over time, her parents divorced and started new families, giving her additional siblings. From a young age, Shannon dreamt of creating a large and loving family of her own, a vision strengthened by her active participation in church and deep faith. She grew up modest and kind-hearted, with a passion for drawing, which earned her numerous awards and prizes. At the age of 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck. Their paths crossed in Florida, where Shannon had moved with her family in her youth. Clay, originally from Alaska, was vacationing in one of the warmer states. They met at a party hosted by mutual friends and immediately took to each other. That evening, Shannon learned a lot about Clay, including that he had continued his education at a school for diesel mechanics in Colorado after high school, then returned home to work on the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, making a good living. However, she discovered he was already married and had two beautiful children from that union. Shannon was not deterred by his complicated past. In fact, she saw it as a positive, believing that it gave him valuable experience for married life. The couple married soon after. The newly minted Mrs. Starbuck moved in with her husband, initially struggling to adapt to the new environment and weather, but quickly settling in. However, married life wasn't as idyllic as Shannon had hoped, with Clay often away, leaving her to manage the household alone. Yet love gave her strength, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end, and he would be back by her side. Meanwhile, she embraced motherhood with his children from his first marriage. It wasn't long before they had their own children together, first a son named Austin, and 3 years later, a brother for him named Blake. In 1996, their family grew again with the birth of a much-awaited daughter, Logan. But with Logan came challenges. She was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at a young age. Shannon embraced her daughter's diagnosis with grace and became her best friend. Later, another daughter brightened the Starbucks life, whom Clay named Serena. Shannon devoted her time to her children, overseeing their health, education, and church teachings. She was known throughout the community for her hobbies, cooking, and crafts. Yet, she was so immersed in her role as a caring mother and loving wife that she didn't notice when her husband began an affair at work. This was a tremendous shock to her, perceived as a deep betrayal. Consequently, in 2000, she filed for divorce, marking a new chapter in her life. Still harboring feelings for her ex-husband, she decided to move to Arizona to dull the pain of their painful separation by starting a relationship with another man. However, this attempt failed as Shannon realized she still loved Clay, who was also reaching out, asking her to return. Convinced he had repented, she gave him a second chance. In 2001, the couple welcomed their son Marshall, their fifth child. Yet, instead of solidifying their marriage, he became a new point of contention. Even a formal remarriage in 2006 could not save their fractured relationship. awakening. 6 months later, they moved to Deer Park in Spokane County, Washington. Clay found a suitable house for their large family. He continued to work at his previous job, so he was away most of the time. Chanin, left to manage the household and kids on her own, took them to movies, theaters, and parks, and organized home parties. However, doubts and distrust poisoned their marriage, further impacted by the long separations and breaks in their relationship. Ultimately, in 2010, the couple permanently separated. Crossing into her 40s, Chanin began to rebuild her life, holding on to hope that she might still experience the joy of love. She resolved never to give up or repeat past mistakes. Even when Clay suffered a serious injury, she chose not to return to him. Nonetheless, she supported her ex-husband and provided whatever help she could. In February 2011, Clay left his job and settled permanently in Deer Park, staying close not just to his children, but to Chanin as well. He still hoped she would return, but she did not share his view, and finally finding freedom, she enjoyed it. After undergoing surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with their father, happy to be away from under their mother's constant supervision. Shannon, breathing new life, found a part-time job and enrolled in a dental assistant course. Tired of being a housewife and needing to support her family, especially as her ex-husband stopped paying child support due to his illness, she still had him nearby for emergencies. The children stayed with him after school every Wednesday, as well as the second and fourth weekends of the month. That summer, Chanin proudly received her certification, marking off one dream and starting to pursue another. Hoping to meet a worthy man, she created a profile on a dating site, feeling a keen need to live for herself. She also regretted spending her best years on a man who did not appreciate her and was capable of deceit. However, a criminal plan one December morning ended her dreams. Chanin Starbucks' funeral took place on December 10, 2011. A large number of people who came to the service testified to her being a bright and sincere person. She found her final resting place at a cemetery in Orlando. Search for the culprit. Public attention to the woman's death spurred law enforcement to move quickly. While focusing on her ex-husband, detectives decided to verify his alibi. As a result, they retraced Clay's movements on December 1st. He once again explained what had happened that morning and detailed where and how his car had broken down. Additionally, the results of the initial examination came in. Starbucks' fingerprints did not match any found at the crime scene. This led to a decision to check him against existing databases while also focusing on Chanin's mobile phone, laptop, and personal diary. At the same time, they explored the possibility of other people being involved in the crime. After carefully examining Mrs. Starbuck's mobile phone, detectives added several names to the list of suspects. Men she had communicated with on the dating site raised suspicions. One, Tom Walker, had scheduled a date with her on December 5th. Hours before her demise, they had candid conversations and exchanged photos. Tom had asked Chanin to take a photo using an adult toy, which she refused. Notably, her body was later found in the exact pose mentioned by Tom. Within an hour, Walker was located. He was shocked not only by the news, but also by being considered a suspect. He immediately explained his activities on the day of her death, which were confirmed by colleagues and surveillance cameras. Next on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Chanin on December 1st. From their correspondence, it was clear he was not looking for a serious relationship. Their interaction was merely casual. It also turned out that the suitor had used a fake name. His real name was John Ken Lane. He worked in a completely different field than he had claimed and was married, hence the secrecy. On the day of the crime, Chanin postponed their morning meeting to a later time, citing headaches. Eventually, the date did not take place. After taking a DNA sample from him, he was released. His alibi was corroborated, even as his deception was revealed to his family. Critical evidence. After these developments, the investigation reverted to square one. While examining Chanin's mobile phone, detectives made a request to the cellular service provider,
uncovering another significant detail.
It turned out that a 911 call was made from the victim's phone at 9:18 a.m. on the morning of December 1st, but the suspect deleted it from the call log. Thanks to a request to the emergency services, the 30-second call was retrieved. Unfortunately, it contained nothing but sobs and rustling sounds before abruptly cutting off. It was also discovered that after the failed call, the call center operator tried to return the call, but it went to voicemail. According to GPS data, Shannon's mobile device was located at her home, pinpointing the exact date of her demise. She had been deprived of life after dropping her kids at school and returning home. This meant that the 11 messages sent afterward were not sent by her. The suspect tried to confuse the investigation. Moreover, he was close to the Starbuck family, as he used a nickname for the youngest son, calling him Marsh in the correspondence. After this information, Clay's statements underwent further scrutiny. He had sufficient motive for ending his ex-wife's life, divorce. Not all partners accept new realities with dignity. Moreover, he had a perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. Thus, authorities decided to again track the suspect's car route, this time using street surveillance camera recordings. This is where officers' suspicions took shape. Starbuck's car had not broken down. Concurrently, results from another analysis arrived. DNA material collected from Shannon's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. Harsh reprisal. The scenario unfolded as follows. On the morning of December 1st, Clay sent a message to his ex-wife asking her to take the kids to school, fabricating a car breakdown. While she was out, he entered the house and waited. During this time, he accessed her unprotected laptop and found personal correspondences that infuriated the already jealous Starbuck. When Shannon returned, a heated argument ensued, which ultimately led to bloodshed. This explained the unusual pose in which the deceased was found, an act of vengeance for her newfound freedom. Afterward, Clay stayed in the house, impersonating her in text exchanges. His intentions to harm his ex-wife might have been long-standing. Now, a friend's words to detectives took on new meaning. During a conversation, she mentioned that Clay and Shannon's relationship was far from what it seemed. Shannon had confessed in candid conversations that she was tired of his constant control and criticisms. Daring to divorce, she feared he might harm her someday. From June to November 2011, she had repeatedly contacted the police, claiming her ex-husband was stalking her. She felt unsafe even in her own home, hence did not trust anyone with the keys. Ultimately, she managed to secure a restraining order against Clay, so their communications were confined to text messages. Careful examination of Mrs. Starbuck's diary made it evident that she not only feared her former lover, but believed he was turning the children against her. He concocted vile stories and portrayed her as promiscuous. Thus, the children's reaction to their father's arrest on February 6, 2012, was not surprising. They refused to believe in his involvement. They were not perturbed by the fact that a tracking program was found on their mother's laptop and a hard drive labeled Chamin's desktop computer in their father's house, along with printed correspondences. The older children doubted the authenticity of the DNA analysis, believing the accusation against their father was far-fetched and the case fabricated. However, the views of law enforcement and other relatives differed. Triumph of truth and justice. At the trial, the prosecution was confident in the man's guilt, supported by a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies. In June 2013, justice prevailed. Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Clay's attorney filed an appeal against the verdict, but it was rejected. To this day, the perpetrator remains behind bars at the Airway Heights Correction Center in Spokane County. Shannon's relatives mourn the woman's untimely departure profoundly. Yet, their hearts are even more shattered by the thought that the children sided with their father. He was so obsessed with his ex-wife that in seeking revenge,
he forgot about the consequences. Unable to accept his new reality, he left his children effectively orphaned. Today, we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. This amazing country attracts tourists from all over the world with the opportunity to relax on snow-white beaches, as if descended from advertising brochures, to touch almost untouched by man-exotic nature, to taste the unique local cuisine, and of course, it is Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair, touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor, in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She will be 16-year-old Esmeralda Reaches. Esmeralda Reaches Martinez was born August 23, 2006, in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Eligio Riscosti and Isabel Martinez Reaches. She grew up in a complete happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends, because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers and was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches's death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following the violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk, supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police also sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results of the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the phones of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Morillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay. Because of the evidence collected against him, the prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Let me remind you that preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime he or she has committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily, and thinking it was a woman's cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Esmeralda was found breathless on the floor of her bathroom, completely bloodied. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, who was the second man that night, Ruben Morillo, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an event that alarmed the public. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the very car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by John Kelly's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiving evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Paniagua Pillier. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Paniagua, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Esmeralda in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Rijo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Marilla Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Otra Banda, Iguay, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. It turned out that originally, the whole company was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Macau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, according to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches' blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized, and medics know how to effectively help a person, But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher John Kelly was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the El Banal Public Cemetery. Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4th, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches' life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Murillo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Ana Muria Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Higüey. Rubiel Murillo Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for John eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you. I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, "It is their turn to fight for justice." A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Agree. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle fear wins, taking precious life.